Raymond had been playing piano at the Grand Oak Hotel for almost 7 years. Every evening, he would walk through the polished lobby, nod at the front desk staff, and take his place behind the beautiful black grand piano that sat in the corner of the lounge. It was a good job. The pay was decent. The tips were generous. And he got to do what he loved most in the world. But more than the money, Raymond loved the attention. He loved the way people would stop talking when he played something particularly beautiful. He loved when guests would come up after his set and shake his hand, telling him he was the best pianist they had ever heard. Over the years, Raymond had developed a certain pride about his abilities. He had trained at one of the finest music schools in the country. He had studied under teachers who had performed in concert halls across Europe. He knew he was talented, and somewhere along the way, that knowledge had turned into something else. It had turned into a kind of quiet arrogance that he carried with him everywhere he went. The lounge at the Grand Oak was a beautiful space. Dark wooden panels lined the walls. Soft golden lights hung from the ceiling. The chairs were covered in deep red velvet, and the bar was made of marble that had been shipped from somewhere far away. The guests who came here were mostly business people in expensive suits, or wealthy couples celebrating anniversaries, or tourists who had more money than they knew what to do with. Raymond fit in perfectly. He wore a crisp black suit every night, and his fingers moved across the keys like water flowing over smooth stones. On this particular Tuesday evening, the lounge was quieter than usual. A few guests sat scattered around the room, speaking in low voices over glasses of wine. Raymond was in the middle of a Chopin piece. Something soft and melancholy, that matched the mood of the rainy night outside. The windows were covered in droplets, and the city lights beyond them looked like blurred paintings. That was when she walked in. Raymond noticed her immediately, though he tried not to show it. She was different from the usual crowd. Her jeans were faded and worn at the knees. Her jacket looked like it had seen better days, maybe better years. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she carried no purse, just a small backpack slung over one shoulder. She looked tired. The kind of tired that sleep alone cannot fix. There were shadows under her eyes, and her shoulders were slightly hunched, as if she was carrying something heavy that no one else could see. She walked to the bar and sat down on one of the tall stools. The bartender, a young man named Peter, looked at her with a polite but uncertain smile. She ordered a glass of water. Just water. Raymond watched from the corner of his eye as she wrapped her hands around the glass like it was something precious. She did not look at her phone. She did not try to start a conversation with anyone. She just sat there, alone. And after a few minutes, she turned her attention to the piano. To Raymond, he felt her eyes on him as he played. It was not an unusual feeling. People watched him all the time. But there was something different about the way this woman looked at him. She was not just listening to the music. She was studying it. Her fingers, resting on the edge of the bar, moved slightly with each note, as if they had a memory of their own. Raymond finished his piece and paused for a moment, letting the last notes fade into the air. A few guests clapped politely. He nodded in acknowledgement, then stood up to take his break. Normally, he would go to the back room, pour himself a coffee, and check his phone for a few minutes. But tonight, curiosity got the better of him. He walked over to the bar and sat down 2 stools away from the woman. Peter brought him his usual, a sparkling water with a slice of lemon. Raymond took a sip and glanced at her. She did not look away. In fact, she met his gaze directly, which surprised him a little. "You play beautifully," she said. Her voice was soft but clear, like someone who had not spoken much in a long time but still remembered how. Raymond smiled. It was the kind of smile he had practiced over the years, polite but slightly superior. "Thank you. I have been doing this for a while." "I can tell," she said. "Chopin, Nocturne in E-flat major. It is one of my favorites." Raymond raised an eyebrow. Most guests did not know the names of the pieces he played. They just knew they liked how it sounded. "You know your classical music," he said. She shrugged. "I used to play. A little. A long time ago." There it was. Those words. Raymond had heard them 100 times before. Everyone used to play a little. It usually meant they had taken lessons as a child, learned a few simple songs, and quit before they ever got to anything difficult. He nodded politely, the way he always did when someone said this. "Is that so?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Yes," she said simply. She did not elaborate. She did not try to impress him with stories of her past. She just took another sip of her water and looked back at the piano. Something about her response annoyed Raymond slightly. He was used to people trying to impress him, trying to prove that they knew something about music. But this woman seemed completely uninterested in proving anything. It was as if his opinion did not matter to her at all. Before he could stop himself, Raymond heard the words coming out of his mouth. "Well, the piano is right there," he said, gesturing toward it with a casual wave of his hand. "I have a few more minutes of my break left. Why do not you play something? I dare you." He said it lightly, almost as a joke. But there was a challenge hidden in his words, and they both knew it. He expected her to laugh it off, to shake her head and say she could not possibly, that she was too rusty, that she would embarrass herself. That was what people always said, but she did not say any of those things. Instead, she looked at him for a long moment. Something flickered in her eyes. Something Raymond could not quite identify. It might have been pain. It might have been fear. Or it might have been something else entirely, something like a door that had been locked for years suddenly being pushed open by an unexpected wind. "A dare," she repeated quietly, almost to herself. Raymond shrugged, already regretting his words a little. "Only if you want to. No pressure." She set down her glass of water. She looked at the piano across the room, and Raymond watched as her expression changed. It was subtle, but he saw it. The tiredness in her face gave way to something else. Resolution, maybe, or surrender. He could not tell which. "Okay," she said softly. She stood up from the bar stool, and Raymond felt a strange sensation in his chest. It was the feeling you get when you realize you have set something in motion that you cannot take back. He had made this dare 100 times before. To guests who giggled and played chopsticks. To drunk businessmen who banged out off-key versions of Happy Birthday. It had always been harmless. A bit of fun. But as he watched this tired woman in her worn-out clothes walk slowly toward the grand piano, Raymond had the strangest feeling that this time was going to be different. He just did not know how different yet. The walk from the bar to the piano was only about 30 steps, but for the woman, it felt like crossing an ocean. Each step brought back memories she had spent years trying to bury. Each step made her heart beat a little faster, made her hands shake a little more. By the time she reached the piano bench, her palms were sweating and her throat felt tight. She stood there for a moment, just looking at the instrument. It was a beautiful piano, the kind she had once dreamed of owning. The black surface was so polished that she could see her own reflection in it. A tired face looked back at her. A face that had aged more in the last 8 years than it should have. A face that had forgotten how to smile the way it used to. Her name was Clara. But she had not introduced herself to the man at the bar. And she was not sure she would. Names carried weight. Names connected you to your past, to the person you used to be. And Clara had spent a long time trying to disconnect from all of that. She sat down on the bench slowly, carefully, as if the piano might break if she moved too fast. The leather of the seat was cool beneath her. The keys stretched out before her, white and black, perfectly arranged, waiting. She placed her hands in her lap and just breathed for a moment. From across the room, Raymond watched with mild curiosity. He had returned to his seat at the bar and was sipping his sparkling water. A few other guests had noticed the woman sitting at the piano, but most had gone back to their conversations. No one expected anything special. Why would they? She looked like someone who had wandered in from the street, not like someone who belonged behind a grand piano in a fancy hotel lounge. But Clara was not thinking about them. She was not thinking about Raymond, or the bartender, or the businessman in the corner talking too loudly on his phone. She was thinking about another piano, in another place, in another life. It had been a small apartment, nothing fancy. The walls were thin, and the heating never worked properly in winter. But it had been home, And in the corner of their tiny living room, there had been an old upright piano that her husband had found at a second-hand shop. It was out of tune, and one of the keys stuck sometimes. But to them, it was the most precious thing they owned. Her husband had been a composer. Not a famous one. Not yet. He wrote music for small theater productions and local dance companies. He gave piano lessons to children in the neighborhood to help pay the bills. But late at night, when the city was quiet, and it was just the two of them, he would sit at that old piano and create the most beautiful melodies Clara had ever heard. She would sit beside him on the narrow bench, her shoulder pressed against his, and listen. Sometimes, she would play with him, their fingers dancing together across the keys. She had been trained at a conservatory when she was young. She had won competitions and received scholarships. People had said she could have had a great career if she had wanted one. But Clara had never wanted fame or stages or applause. She had only wanted the music, and she had only wanted him. They had been married for 6 years when it happened. 6 years of small apartments and big dreams. 6 years of late-night songs and early morning coffees. 6 years of planning for a future that seemed so bright and full of possibility. The accident happened on a rainy night, much like this one. They had been driving home from a concert in the city. Clara was in the passenger seat, tired but happy. Her husband was at the wheel, humming one of his new compositions. The road was slippery, the other driver ran a red light. There was a crash of metal and glass, and then there was nothing. Clara woke up in a hospital 3 days later. Broken ribs, a fractured arm, cuts and bruises that would heal with time. But her husband had not woken up at all. He had died at the scene, the doctors told her. He had not suffered, as if that was supposed to make it better, as if anything could make it better. After the funeral, Clara could not stay in that apartment. She could not look at the old piano in the corner without feeling like her chest was being crushed. She could not walk past the coffee shop where they used to have breakfast without wanting to scream. So she left. She packed a small bag, got in her car, and started driving. She did not know where she was going. She did not care. That was 8 years ago. Since then, Clara had lived in more places than she could count. She had worked as a waitress, a cleaner, a grocery store clerk. She had slept in her car when money was tight and in cheap motels when she could afford them. She had crossed the country twice, always moving, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots, because roots meant connections, and connections meant pain. She had not touched a piano in all that time. Not once. The thought of playing without him beside her was too much to bear. Music had been their language. The way they spoke to each other when words were not enough. Without him, what was the point? Without him, every note would be a reminder of what she had lost. But tonight, something had shifted. Maybe it was the rain outside, so similar to that terrible night. Maybe it was the exhaustion that had settled so deep into her bones that she could barely feel anything anymore. Maybe it was the arrogant smile on the face of the man at the bar, the way he had said, "I dare you," as if he already knew she would fail. Or maybe it was simply time. Maybe 8 years of running had finally caught up with her, and there was nowhere left to go. Clara raised her hands from her lap and held them over the keys. They were trembling. She could see the slight shake in her fingers, the way they hovered uncertainly in the air. She thought about getting up and walking away. She thought about apologizing to the man, telling him she had changed her mind, that she could not do it after all. That would be the safe thing to do. That would be the easy thing. But then she thought about her husband. She thought about the way he used to look at her when she played, like she was the most amazing thing he had ever seen. She thought about the song he had written for her on their wedding day, a piece so beautiful that she had cried the first time she heard it. She had never played it for anyone else. She had never even played it for herself, not since he died. It had been locked away inside her, along with all the other memories she could not face. She took a deep breath. The air filled her lungs, and for a moment, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt ready. Her fingers lowered slowly toward the keys. The first touch was electric. A shock of familiarity that traveled up her arms and into her heart. The ivory was cool and smooth beneath her fingertips, exactly as she remembered. It was like meeting an old friend after years apart. It was like coming home. Raymond set down his glass and leaned forward slightly. A few of the other guests glanced over, their conversations pausing mid-sentence. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Clara closed her eyes. She thought of her husband one more time. She thought of his smile, his laugh, the way he would kiss her forehead before bed every night, and then, before she could talk herself out of it, she began to play. The first note hung in the air like a question, and what followed was an answer that no one in that room would ever forget. The first few notes were soft, almost hesitant, like a child taking their first steps after a long illness. Clara's fingers found the keys by memory, not by sight. Her eyes remained closed, her face tilted slightly upward, as if she was listening to something only she could hear. The melody was simple at first, just a handful of notes strung together like pearls on a thread, but even in those opening moments, there was something different about the sound, something that made people stop what they were doing and turn their heads. Raymond noticed it immediately. He had been expecting something clumsy. He had been expecting wrong notes and awkward pauses, the kind of playing that makes you smile politely while secretly wishing it would end. But this was not that. This was something else entirely. The notes coming from the piano were clear and pure, each one placed with a precision that spoke of years and years of practice. And beneath the precision, there was something deeper. There was feeling. The melody began to grow. What had started as a whisper was becoming a conversation. Clara's left hand joined her right, adding depth and richness to the sound. The music swelled like a wave building far out at sea, gathering strength and power as it moved toward the shore. And still her eyes remained closed. Still her face held that expression of complete concentration, as if the rest of the world had simply ceased to exist. At the bar, the young bartender had stopped polishing glasses. He stood motionless, a cloth in one hand and a wine glass in the other, staring at the woman at the piano. He had worked at the Grand Oak for 2 years. He had heard Raymond play hundreds of times. He had always thought Raymond was good. But this was different. This was not just good. This was something he did not have words for. The businessman in the corner had ended his phone call. He had not said goodbye to whoever was on the other end. He had simply lowered the phone from his ear and let it rest on the table. Forgotten, his mouth was slightly open, his eyes fixed on the piano. Beside him, a couple who had been quietly arguing about something had gone silent. The woman had reached across the table and taken her husband's hand without looking at him. They sat like that, connected by touch and by the music that filled the room. And Raymond could not move. He could not breathe. He sat on his bar stool with his sparkling water forgotten in front of him, and he watched as this stranger, this tired woman in worn-out clothes, played his piano in a way he had never heard it played before. The piece she was playing was not something Raymond recognized. It was not Chopin or Beethoven or any of the classical masters he had studied for so many years. It was something else, something original, something that felt like it had been pulled directly from someone's soul and translated into sound. It had moments of joy, bright and dancing, like sunlight reflecting off water, and it had moments of sorrow so deep that Raymond felt his chest tighten, felt something stirring behind his eyes that he had not felt in a very long time. Clara was not thinking about the audience anymore. She was not thinking about the hotel lounge, or the rain outside, or the dare that had brought her to this bench. She was somewhere else entirely. She was back in that small apartment with the thin walls and the broken heating. She was sitting beside her husband on their narrow piano bench, feeling his warmth against her shoulder. She was listening to him play this piece for the first time, watching his fingers move across the keys of their second-hand piano, seeing the pride and love in his eyes when he turned to her and said, "This one is for you." He had written it for their wedding day. It had been his gift to her, more precious than any ring or flower or spoken vow. He had called it simply, "Her Song," because he said no other title could capture what she meant to him. It had 3 movements, each one representing a different part of their love. The first was bright and playful, full of the joy of their early days together, when everything was new and every moment felt like an adventure. The second was slower, deeper. A meditation on the quiet comfort of being truly known by another person, of having someone who understood you without words. And the third was something else entirely. Clara moved into the second movement, and the room seemed to hold its breath. The notes became gentler now, more intimate. It was the kind of music that made you think of late nights and whispered conversations, of hands held under blankets and foreheads pressed together in the dark. It was the sound of two people who had built a world together, small and imperfect, but entirely their own. A woman near the window wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She did not know why she was crying. She did not know anything about the stranger at the piano or the story behind this music, but something in the melody had reached inside her and found a tender place, a place where she kept her own memories of love and loss and longing. The music had touched that place, and now the tears were falling without permission. She was not the only one. Across the room, a man in a gray suit stared at the piano with wet eyes. He was thinking about his mother, who had passed away last spring. She used to play piano when he was a child. Nothing fancy, just simple songs that she would hum along to while he sat beside her on the bench. He had not thought about those moments in years, but now, listening to this woman play, he could see his mother's hands on the keys. He could hear her voice. He could feel her presence beside him. Just for a moment, like a gentle hand on his shoulder, the second movement faded, and there was a pause, just a breath, just a heartbeat of silence. And then the third movement began. This was different from what had come before. This was not joy, and it was not comfort. This was grief. This was the sound of a heart breaking, of a world falling apart, of standing at the edge of an emptiness so vast that you cannot see the other side. Clara's fingers moved faster now, more urgently. The notes tumbled over each other like waves in a storm, crashing and retreating, building and breaking. There was anger in the music. There was despair. There was the raw, ugly truth of loss that no one wants to talk about but everyone knows. Raymond felt something wet on his cheek and realized with shock that he was crying. He, who prided himself on his composure. He, who had sat through countless performances without ever losing control. He was crying, and he could not stop. The music had broken through every wall he had built around himself, every layer of pride and arrogance and self-protection. It had found the boy he used to be, before the years of training and performing had taught him to keep his emotions locked away. It had found that boy, and it had set him free. The third movement reached its peak, a crescendo of sound and feeling that seemed to fill every corner of the room, and then, slowly, it began to soften. The storm passed. The waves calmed. What emerged from the chaos was something unexpected. It was hope. Small at first, fragile as a new leaf in spring, but growing stronger with each note. It was the sound of someone finding their way out of the darkness. It was the sound of someone learning to breathe again. The final notes hung in the air like the last light of sunset, golden and warm and impossibly beautiful. Then there was silence. Clara opened her eyes. For a moment, she did not know where she was. She blinked at the polished black surface of the piano, at her own hands resting on the keys, at the blurred shapes of the room around her. And then she heard it. Applause. It started with one person, then another, until the entire lounge was filled with the sound of clapping hands. People were standing up from their chairs. People were wiping their eyes. People were looking at her with expressions she did not understand. Expressions of wonder and gratitude, and something that looked almost like awe. Clara turned on the bench and saw Raymond walking toward her. His face was wet with tears. His earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by something softer, something humbled. He stopped a few feet away from her, and for a long moment, he just looked at her. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Who are you?" Clara did not answer. She was not sure she knew anymore. The applause continued for what felt like a very long time. Clara sat frozen on the piano bench, her hands still resting on the keys, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She had not expected this. She had not expected any of this. When she had walked to the piano, she had not been thinking about an audience or a performance. She had only been thinking about him. about the song he had written for her, about the music she had locked away for 8 long years. But now the room was full of noise and movement. People were standing. People were clapping. A woman near the back was openly sobbing into a napkin, and Raymond was standing in front of her with tears on his face, asking her a question she did not know how to answer. "Who are you?" Such a simple question. 3 small words. But they carried the weight of everything Clara had been running from. They asked her to remember the person she used to be, the life she used to have, the name she had tried so hard to forget. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her throat was tight, and her eyes were burning. The emotions that had poured out through her fingers were now flooding back into her chest, filling her up until she felt like she might overflow. Raymond seemed to understand. He took a step back, giving her space. The applause was fading now, settling into a soft murmur of voices as people returned to their seats. But no one had gone back to their conversations. No one had picked up their phones. Everyone was still looking at the piano, still looking at her, as if they were waiting for something more. The hotel manager had appeared at the edge of the lounge. He was a tall man with silver hair and a neat gray suit. He had been upstairs in his office when he heard the music through the floor. At first he thought it was Raymond playing something new, something different, but then he had listened more closely. And he had realized this was not Raymond at all. This was something extraordinary. He had come downstairs to see for himself, and now he stood by the door with his hands clasped in front of him, watching the woman at the piano with an expression of deep curiosity. Raymond pulled a chair from a nearby table and sat down facing Clara. The closeness felt right somehow, like they had moved past the usual boundaries between strangers. What had just happened in this room had changed something between them. It had changed something in the air itself. "I am sorry," Raymond said quietly. His voice was rough, like he had been holding back more than he wanted to admit. "I am sorry for the way I spoke to you earlier. The dare. It was arrogant. It was rude. I thought I knew what you were. And I was wrong. I was so wrong." Clara shook her head slowly. "You do not need to apologize," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper, hoarse from disuse and emotion. "You did not know. How could you know? I did not want anyone to know." Raymond leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "That piece you played, I have never heard anything like it. It was not just music. It was something else. It was like you were telling a story without words. A story that everyone in this room could feel, even if they did not understand it." Clara looked down at her hands. They had stopped trembling now. They looked older than she remembered, worn by years of hard work and harder days. But they had not forgotten. That was the miracle. After everything, they had not forgotten. "It was written for me," she said softly, "by my husband, a long time ago." Raymond was quiet for a moment. "Your husband," he repeated. "Is he a musician?" He was. The past tense hung in the air between them. He was a composer. Not famous. Not yet. But he should have been. He would have been. If things had been different. Raymond did not ask what happened. He did not need to. The grief in her voice said everything. The way she had played that third movement, with all its sorrow and fury and desperate hope, had told the whole story without a single word. "I am sorry," he said again. And this time, he meant it in a different way. Not an apology for his own behavior, but a recognition of her pain, a simple acknowledgement that life had hurt her in ways he could not imagine. Clara nodded. She appreciated that he did not push for more. She appreciated that he simply sat with her in the weight of the moment, not trying to fix anything or make it better. Some things could not be fixed. Some things could only be carried. The hotel manager approached slowly, his footsteps soft on the thick carpet. He stopped a respectful distance away and cleared his throat gently. "Excuse me," he said. "I do not mean to intrude. But I had to come down and see for myself. That was the most beautiful performance I have ever witnessed in this hotel. In any hotel, actually. In any place at all." Clara looked up at him. She was not sure what to say. Compliments had once been a normal part of her life, back when she performed regularly, back when her name meant something in certain circles. But that was a long time ago. That was a different person. The manager continued. I know this might seem forward, but I would be honored if you would consider playing here again. We could arrange something. A regular spot, perhaps, or just whenever you are in town. Whatever works for you. I just know that the guests here, the people who heard you tonight, they will never forget it. I will never forget it. Clara felt something stir in her chest. It was a feeling she had not experienced in years. It was possibility. It was the tiny spark of a future that looked different from the endless gray road she had been traveling for so long. But she was not ready. Not yet. The wound was still too fresh, even after all this time. Tonight had been a beginning, but it was not a solution. Healing did not happen in a single moment. It happened slowly, day by day, note by note. Thank you, she said to the manager. That is very kind. But I am just passing through. My car broke down, and I am waiting for it to be fixed. Tomorrow, I will be gone. The manager nodded, though there was disappointment in his eyes. Of course. I understand. But if you ever change your mind, please know that there is a place for you here. Always. He handed her a small business card, which she took and slipped into her jacket pocket without looking at it. Then he excused himself and walked back toward the lobby, glancing over his shoulder one more time before he disappeared. Raymond had been quiet during this exchange. Now he spoke again. You said you used to play. Before. What did you mean by that? Were you a professional? Clara hesitated. The question touched on the part of her past she had worked hardest to bury. But something about tonight. About the music, and the tears, and the strange connection she felt with this man, who had started out so arrogant and ended up so humbled, made her want to tell the truth. Yes, she said. I was. A long time ago. I trained at a conservatory. I performed in concert halls. I won competitions. People knew my name. In certain circles, there were recordings, there were reviews, there was a whole life. Raymond's eyes widened. He was starting to understand. What happened? He asked. Why did you stop? Clara took a deep breath. The rain was still falling outside, running down the windows in silver streams. The lounge had grown quiet again. The other guests giving them privacy. Sensing that something important was happening in this corner of the room. The accident, she said simply. The same one that took my husband. I survived. But part of me did not. The part that could make music. The part that could feel joy. The part that believed life was worth living. That part died with him. So I left everything behind. I drove away. And I kept driving. And I did not touch a piano again. Not until tonight. Raymond was silent. There were tears in his eyes again. And he did not try to hide them. Until tonight, he repeated softly. Until I dared you to play. Clara almost smiled. Yes. Until you dared me to play. They sat together in the quiet. Two strangers who were not quite strangers anymore. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Inside, something was beginning to change. Clara left the hotel that night with Raymond's phone number written on a napkin in her pocket. She had not asked for it. He had simply handed it to her as she stood up to leave, pressing it into her palm with a look that said, please. Please do not disappear. Please let this mean something. She did not promise anything. She could not. The road ahead was still unclear, and she had spent too many years making her life small enough to fit inside a car. But she took the napkin. She folded it carefully and put it next to the hotel manager's business card. 2 pieces of paper. 2 doors that might lead somewhere new. The mechanic called the next morning. Her car was fixed. It had been a simple problem. Just a worn-out belt that needed replacing. She paid the bill with the last of her cash and drove out of town the same way she had driven out of 100 towns before. The highway stretched ahead of her, gray and endless, familiar as an old wound. But something was different now. As she drove, Clara found herself thinking about the night before. She thought about the way the piano keys had felt under her fingers after so many years of silence. She thought about the music that had poured out of her, the grief and love and longing that had been locked inside for so long. She thought about the faces in the lounge, the tears, the applause. She thought about Raymond, sitting in front of her with his arrogance stripped away, asking her who she was. She still did not know the answer to that question. But for the first time in 8 years, she wanted to find out. The first few months were hard. Clara did not suddenly transform into a different person. She did not wake up one morning and find that all her pain had disappeared. Grief does not work that way. It does not leave just because you want it to. It stays with you, becomes part of you, changes shape over time but never fully goes away. But something had shifted. The music had cracked open a door that Clara had kept sealed shut. And now, light was coming through. Small amounts at first, just enough to see by. But it was there, it was real. She started playing again. Not in concert halls or fancy hotels, just wherever she could find a piano. A church in a small town that let her practice in the evenings. A community center that had an old upright in the basement. A music school that needed someone to tune their instruments and did not mind if she stayed late to play. She took whatever opportunities came her way. Not for money or recognition, but because she needed to play. She needed to feel her husband's music flowing through her fingers again. She needed to remember who she had been before the accident and figure out who she could become after. She called Raymond 3 months after that night at the hotel. He answered on the second ring, as if he had been waiting. His voice was warm, surprised, happy. They talked for 2 hours, about music and grief, and the strange ways life can change direction when you least expect it. He told her about his own journey, how he had started playing piano as a child to escape a difficult home, how music had saved him, even as it made him proud and closed off. He told her that the night she played had changed something in him too. It had reminded him why he started in the first place. It had reminded him that music was not about showing off or being the best. It was about connecting with people. It was about touching something true. They became friends, not lovers, not partners, just 2 people who understood something about each other that most people did not. Raymond encouraged her to perform again, to share her gift with the world. Clara resisted at first. The thought of standing on a stage, of being seen and known, still terrified her. But Raymond did not push. He simply waited, the way she had learned to wait for herself. A year after that rainy night, Clara released an album. It was small, produced independently, sold mostly through the internet. It contained 12 pieces, all of them composed by her husband. Songs he had written for her, for them, for a future they would never have. She called the album Unfinished, because that was what their story was. Unfinished but not forgotten, unfinished but still beautiful. The album found an audience. Not a huge one, but enough. People wrote to her from all over the world, telling her how the music had moved them, how it had helped them through their own grief, their own losses, their own dark nights of the soul. Clara read every message. She cried over some of them. She saved all of them in a folder on her computer, proof that her husband's music was still alive, still reaching people, still doing what it had always done best. 2 years after that night at the hotel, Clara performed at a concert hall for the first time since the accident. It was not a big venue, just a small theater in a city she had never been to before. But the seats were full, and the audience was quiet. And when she walked onto the stage and sat down at the grand piano, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt ready. Raymond was there, sitting in the front row. He had flown across the country to be there, using vacation days he had been saving for years. When Clara looked out at the audience before she began to play, she found his face in the crowd. He smiled at her, a small, encouraging smile, and she felt her heart steady in her chest. She played her husband's songs. All of them. The joyful ones and the sad ones. The quiet ones and the loud ones. She played the piece he had written for their wedding, the one she had performed that rainy night in the hotel lounge. And when she reached the third movement, the one full of grief and fury and desperate hope, she did not hold back. She let it all pour out. Every drop of pain and love and longing she had been carrying for all these years. The audience wept. Clara wept too. But these were not only tears of sorrow. They were tears of release, tears of healing, tears of finally letting go. After the concert, Clara stood backstage and received visitors. People shook her hand and thanked her. Critics told her the performance was magnificent. Other musicians asked about her technique, her training, her story. She answered their questions as best she could, though she knew that words could never fully explain what had happened to her, what had brought her to this moment. Raymond was the last one to come backstage. He stood in the doorway for a moment, just looking at her. Then he walked over and wrapped his arms around her in a hug that said more than any words could. "He would be proud of you," Raymond said quietly. "Your husband. He would be so proud." Clara closed her eyes and let herself be held. She thought about the man she had loved and lost. She thought about the music he had left behind, the gift he had given her that she was only now learning to unwrap. She thought about the long road that had brought her here, the years of running and hiding and refusing to feel, and she thought about a rainy night in a hotel lounge, when a stranger with an arrogant smile had looked at her and said 3 words that changed everything. "I dare you." Sometimes, that is all it takes. A single moment, a single challenge, a single spark that lights a fire you did not know you still had inside you. Clara had been lost for a very long time. But now, finally, she was finding her way home.